Good afternoon. Welcome to another live broadcast by Rightmove. My name is Daniel Barea, and I will be hosting today's conversation. So this is the latest in a series of webinars that we've done since the coronavirus hit the UK. We've been trying our best to keep you updated and informed as things progress. It's been just over a month, it's been 5 weeks now since the housing market has reopened after about 7 weeks in lockdown. So many of you have gotten in touch with us to ask what's happening in the market now. You've got questions about what's happening to prices and supply and demand. And so we're here now to answer as many of these questions as possible. And to help answer these questions, we're very lucky to have one of the best people available, really, to be live here with us in just a few minutes. Many of you will know him already. His name is Miles Shipside. He's a regular face on BBC News. He's got over 40 years of experience in the property world as a chartered surveyor and estate agent, and perhaps even more relevant for today's purposes, he's one of the founders at Rightmove and one of the UK's leading housing market analysts. So with huge amounts of data available, he's in a position better than most to see in real time how the housing market is behaving and developing, what's happening with prices, how many people are looking, what they're looking for, where they're looking, and so much more. So I'll be bringing Miles on in just a couple of minutes. But first, just wanted to make a couple of points before we start. Firstly, the data that we will be covering and using in today's discussion is from England only. And there's a reason for this. The reason is that the housing market in Wales and Scotland is still effectively closed, much as it was in England just over a month ago when we were in lockdown. When it comes to Scotland, their government has talked about relaxing restrictions on house moves from the 29th of June, which is good news. And we're hoping to hear news about what's going to happen in Wales fairly soon. So unfortunately, at the moment, there isn't very much in the form of updates about what's happened in these markets just yet. So if you're interested in hearing about those markets, stay tuned to our newsletter and our blog, because as soon as something is out and we know something, we will put it up on our blog and let you know in our newsletter. Next, if you would like to ask a question, you're very welcome to do so. In fact, we welcome them. We would like as many as possible. You can do so if you're on a laptop by using the control panel that should be on the right, top right corner of your screen. So you should just use that control panel and you see a little question box. It should be quite easy to find. If you're on a mobile, just tap the screen anywhere and the question box should pop up. Speaking of questions, there are thousands of you right now on the line, which is good. We're excited about that. We do have a team working behind the scenes as you send in the questions. They are taking all the questions and grouping them into categories and feeding them through to me so that we can get through as many of them as possible. So although I may not read out your questions specifically, hopefully we'll still cover as many of the questions that you are sending through. Okay, well, I'm just about to bring Miles over, but before I do, I want to kick this off by asking you a question, just so that we can get a better idea of who we're talking to, who's on the line, and what your position is as far as with your buying or selling. So your screens will turn blue in a second because we're going to launch a poll. And the question we want to ask you is, before lockdown, what were you planning on doing? Were you going to buy and sell a property, but only buy, not sell, only sell, or were you going to rent a property? Or if none of those apply to you, then just select the last option, which is that you did not plan to do any of the above. And it is good to see you're active and the many of you responding, which is fantastic. So in a few seconds. I'm just going to leave that. If you haven't voted yet, you have a couple of more seconds to do it, and we will close the poll in a sec and have a look at what you have said. Let's take a look. Okay, so a good 60% of you are buyers, which is good. 22% looking to buy and sell a property, 6% only to sell, 2% of you are renters looking, you were planning on renting from a landlord, and another 11% of you weren't planning on doing any of those. Okay, that's good to know who is there and who we're talking to. So with no further ado, let me bring on Mr. Miles Shipside. Hopefully the technology will work and he will appear on your screens now. Miles, are you there?
Hello, can you see me?
Ah, there you are. Miles, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Fantastic. I know you are a busy person, especially now during these times. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to come over here and answer all these questions. And trust me, there are a lot of them.
Excellent.
Hope you've got a functional crystal ball on your desk there somewhere, as well as there are questions. People want to know what your thoughts are for the future. So we'll get to that eventually.
Excellent. We've got lots of statistics on the present. Statistics about the future are a bit harder to come by.
Okay. Well, before we start taking specific questions from the audience, actually, I thought it would be helpful in order to get some context to this conversation. If you could actually rewind a little bit and give us an overview of how the market was behaving leading up to lockdown. I think it's going to answer some of the questions that have been sent in itself, and it definitely will help to add context afterwards to the next questions coming up. So if we went back to, I don't know, a year or as far back as you would like to go, what was the market doing? How was it behaving just before lockdown?
Seems a long time ago now, doesn't it? So much has happened since. But cast your mind back actually to perhaps the Brexit referendum, and there was a slower market following that result because there were minority governments, a lack of certainty, perhaps a lack of leadership and direction. And during times of uncertainty, some people hold back and postpone or pause with some of their housing needs. Not always easy to do, because if you've got a growing family or a job move, one can only put off with the lack of space or the longer commute for so long. Then we had the election in December of last year, and a majority government and a lot more certainty. And what we saw was a release of that demand of people that have been holding back for more certainty. So we went into this year with sales agreed up 11% on the previous year, and actually the busiest start to a year for 4 years. So very good activity compared to previous years, low mortgage rates, and more people coming to market and more people buying properties. So a buoyant market. Important to note that prices weren't running away, but gentle-ish price increases of around 2, 3, 4% on an annual basis, but certainly a buoyant market.
Would that increase in price be due to the increase in demand that you were seeing at the beginning of the year?
That's right. More buyers and outstripping the number of sellers, and leading to some gentle upwards price pressure, which was then, as we were coming into the even busier spring market, obviously, sadly, coronavirus came along and changed everybody's lives.
No one saw that coming. But during that lockdown period, did anything notable happen in the housing market? I mean, for obvious reasons, there weren't many new houses coming to the market, but the ones that were on the market, that were already on the market, did many of them, were they withdrawn or were they reduced in price?
Yeah, I think
What
because of
happened then?
because of that buoyant start to the year, obviously a lot of people previously probably delayed or postponed their moves. We actually found that everybody nearly stuck with it. So very few properties withdrawn, and most of the sales that were agreed prior to lockdown actually held together as well. So what I suppose one of the major things that did happen is that people living in their homes, locked in their homes for a long period of time, a lot of those probably decided that they wanted a different sort of home, or unfortunately with some obviously a change in personal circumstances. So you've got additional demand added to the already pent-up demand as we went into what was heading for a very busy spring market.
Okay, and then lockdown happened, and that whole definitely a lot of people would have changed plans. They had to, obviously, because of what was happening. And but I'd like to actually ask this question to the audience now. Once again, we're going to launch another poll for you. What we want to ask you this time is after so once the lockdown came through, did that affect or have an impact on your plans? So the question is, what impact did lockdown have on your plans to buy, sell, or rent a home? There's a few answers there to choose from. You can, is that were you planning? Are you now planning to move and was not planning to before? Are you just going ahead as planned, or have you postponed your plans for now, but you plan to go ahead relatively soon? Or just have you canceled everything and withdrawn from the process altogether? So let's just leave that open for a couple of more seconds. And if you haven't answered, let's give you 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1, and let's look at those results, Miles. Okay, so actually the majority of people at 45% are saying that they are still marching ahead as planned. And there's a significant chunk of 37% who decided to postpone their plans, and they will be going ahead soon. I guess soon could mean anywhere a month, 3 or 6, I'm not quite sure. Is that what you would have expected to see, Miles?
Yeah, and interesting actually, when we did a webinar, it was probably 6-7 weeks ago now, 6% of people said that they'd withdrawn from making plans, and actually it was 7% this time. So the vast majority appear to be carrying on, and indeed some of the statistics we're going to show indicate that's happening as well.
Well, let's look at those statistics then now. What has the activity been like since the market reopened in England on the 13th of May?
This slide that's coming up, we featured in the house price index that we launched on Monday, but we've updated it with latest figures. So this shows a 7-day rolling average compared to the same 7 days a year ago, and you can see in the middle there's an axis on the left with a 0%, which is actually the same as last year. If it's above the line, we're ahead of last year. If we're below the line, obviously it's below last year. So you will actually see before lockdown, back at beginning of March, all the indices of demand, new listings and sales agreed that are highlighted in the lines there. They're actually above a year ago. Then obviously lockdown happened, effectively the market suspended or paused. So demand held up better than properties coming to market, which is on the new listings line and sales agreed. And it wasn't, if you like, it's lighting the blue touch paper come the 13th of May when the market was reopened. Demand absolutely took off when people realized that they could leave their houses to view properties again. And you can see searches on Rightmove. So this is actually number of inquiries, that demand. So that's sales inquiries.
Right.
Yeah, sales inquiries, England only, because obviously, let's not forget Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland this time still shut as well. So these inquiries to agents rocketing up, and that's the lighter blue line, are now at a stage nearly 60% above the same 7-day rolling average of a year ago. So, boom time conditions almost, Dan, but
Yeah.
this is a release of that demand. So some of this demand has just been sitting there, would normally have happened in a spring market, but also I think an indication of people sitting at home and reappraising their needs. And interestingly, I think on the poll that we just had, around 12% of people weren't planning to move before lockdown, but during lockdown did decide to move. So that's an element of that extra demand that we see. And interestingly, just picking on new listings and sales agreed, obviously there's a bit of a time lag after inquiries to agents, but latest daily figures hot off the press for you. The number of properties coming to market, 14% higher yesterday than the same day a year ago, and the number of sales being agreed between buyers and sellers and marked as sold subject to contract on Rightmove yesterday 13% ahead of the same day last year.
Wow.
So that pent-up demand means we're now exceeding the figures of a year ago. But an important one to note is that there were 175,000 sellers that we estimated that normally would have come to market during those 7 weeks of lockdown. So if you look at that new listing line, they appear to be coming back, albeit slowly, but now there's more sellers coming to market than there were at this time a year ago. So a sharp upturn in all the main statistics. This is literally hot off the press, as we say, and I think has confounded a lot of people who there were some gloomy predictions around, but certainly England's got moving again.
Hmm. Yeah, you can see the line of the new listings has definitely shot upwards, but not proportionally actually to the level that demand has increased. So increase does seem to be increasing at a much higher rate than supply, and we'll get to this eventually, but that's bound to have an impact, at least to some extent, on house prices. You partly answered that already, but I just wanted to clarify it. This demand, which is incredibly high right now, are they resulting in actual transactions and sales?
Indeed. So we've been out of home moving lockdown for around 5 weeks now. And an incredible, we just measured it today, the latest figure, 60,000 new sales have been agreed in the last 5 weeks. So obviously that was from a standing start. People have had to view properties and arrange to do that. So there was a time lag there. But in spite of that time lag, a really incredible number of sales being agreed. So obviously, as you said earlier, that has an effect on prices as well.
And agents coping with this increase in demand and in inquiries, how are they facilitating viewings in light of the precautions that need to be taken as a result of the coronavirus?
Yeah, I mean, the reopening of the housing market came with caveats from the government, quite rightly, to ensure everybody was kept safe. So where possible, an agent will look to accompany you around, or if the seller shows you around their property, agents are giving clear advice on how to handle viewings. So social distancing, obviously. We carried out a survey actually of home movers on Rightmove, and their main concerns and needs were for social distancing in the house, hand sanitizer, and not touching any surfaces. So everybody seems to be aware of this etiquette that's been drilled into us over the last few weeks, and we did a survey asking people were they concerned about viewings, and to be fair, it came back to say there was a moderate degree of worry about viewing, but with those precautions in place, they were what people expected, and obviously they're there to make sure that everybody's safe, but also they can get on with their moves, because there were a large number of pent-up moves in the pipeline, and obviously a large demand from buyers and renters as well.
So these sales that have, so this demand that has translated into sales, I know that an important metric here to look at is the price that those sales have achieved, right? So one of the ways you measure this, I believe, is by looking at the percentage of the asking price that was achieved in that sale, right? You do have data, I believe, on this that you're going to share soon, but once again, I want to ask the audience their opinion. I think, well, why don't we quiz the audience on what you believe is happening right now with these sales that have happened since the market in England was reopened. The question is, what is the average percentage of the asking price that you believe those sales have achieved? Will it be less than 90% of the asking price, between 90 and 95%, between 95 and 97%, or between 97 and 100%?
And this will be interesting, Dan, given some of the gloomy predictions about house prices. It'll be interesting to see what our audience, what their perception is.
Absolutely. In fact, I have a few questions about what you've mentioned about the predictions and all that coming up in a second. Thank you very much for sending all of these answers in. So many of you replying, which is fantastic. We really do appreciate it. I'm just going to, okay, if we can get the poll closed now, and let's look at those results. Okay, so the biggest chunk there is a 32%. Those people who believe the achieved price is 90 to 95%, and followed by 29% who said 95 to 97%, and 24% who have said 97 to 100%. Okay, let's get rid of the suspense now and tell us what it actually has been.
Okay, well, we did reveal this in our house price index. So 24% of our audience have either read that or they're accurate with their perceptions. So we measured thousands of properties that sold after lockdown, and the average percentage of price achieved compared to the last advertised asking price on Rightmove was 97.7%. So in that top section. So if we can look at the next slide, we've actually got this split regionally. You'll see England down the bottom, 97.7%, and importantly as well, say you can just have a look at that percentage of asking price column for your particular region too. But we then compared it against the land registry statistics. Latest available ones were for February. Land registry measures every property sold price, completed price in England. Last available one, as I say, February. 96.6% was the figure back in February. So it's now 97.7%, slightly different timescale because one is completion prices and this is sold subject to contracts. There may be some renegotiation between subject to contract and completion. And obviously for these solds that we've measured at 97.7%, we won't actually know until the land reg data comes out in 3-4 months time as to actual completion prices. But this is actual fact, Dan. So we've got all those sold prices subject to contract. We've compared them against the last advertised asking price, and you will see that it's actually higher than the pre-lockdown February land registry price. So that might indicate that prices are slightly higher now, actually, than they were in February. So some upwards price pressure, and maybe a result of that big increase in demand and less stock for sale being available. So it is important to stress that these are averages. Some of the properties that we analysed sold for over asking price, some obviously under asking price. So it's not a rule of thumb across the country to say, let's negotiate a reduction of 2.3% on every property, or the regional variations that we've got listed up there. Obviously, it depends how realistically priced the property was in the first place. It depends on local market conditions. It depends how many reductions the property has already had in asking price before the final asking price that it was advertised at. So all sorts of variance there. But the general trend, and I'll re-emphasize this point again, there's been speculation about what might happen to prices. This is the first factual analysis that anybody's ever done, and actually it shows slight upwards price pressure, and indeed the price of property coming to market in the last month, so that's new seller asking prices advertised on Rightmove, compared to 3 months ago. So these are properties that may not have been sold yet, but all properties that have come to market in the last 4 weeks, that showed that those prices were on average 1.9% higher in England than 3 months ago pre-lockdown. So both in terms of the price of property coming to market, slight upwards price pressure compared to 3 months ago, and on these sold price statistics, some slight upwards price pressure. So well done to the 24% of people that got it right.
Yeah, there is definitely going to be, there are many questions coming in about this particular chart. A lot of them actually are questions that are very specific. What about my area? What about my town, my street, even my postcode? Obviously, we're not going to be able to answer all of these. What's the best advice you can give to someone who actually wants to find something specific to their own area? I mean, regional and national averages are a good indication, but what can they do to get some more granular data?
And again, I suppose the interesting thing, just looking at all the regions and getting closer to people's location where they're looking to buy or sell, all of those regions are pretty close. There's no sign of major price drops, or indeed all of them show prices without exception above the February land reg data. So you might say that there's degrees of upwards price pressure in all areas, but some slight variances between different regions. West Midlands comes out the highest, but the lowest in the Northeast, I think, is not massively behind. So it does depend on local market conditions, but also how realistically priced, as I say, those properties were in the first place. One of the key things to look at in terms of your local market, if you set up an alert on Rightmove, is obviously look at the level of price reductions that are notified to you on alerts. If sellers are reducing their prices, and if you do a reduction of 2% or more on Rightmove, it's sent out again on alerts. So you will notice if there's more reductions coming through. So that's one of the signs of people struggling to sell and possibly downward pressure on prices. But interestingly, a year ago in June, 34% of properties had a price reduction since they were first marketed. Actually, in the last month, only 26% of properties have had a price reduction since first marketing. So we don't, at the moment, seem to be seeing price reductions coming through at all. And I suppose if you look at that high demand figure that we saw in the earlier chart, that's probably not surprising, particularly if there's active buyer demand and indeed a degree of upwards price pressure. But obviously some properties, people can be too wishful with their asking prices, and a reduction is required.
Lots of really interesting stuff there, Miles, and I have a few follow-up questions on this, but we're getting a live update now on the situation in Wales. We've just got an announcement, and this is hot off the press. So this is an update for Wales. From Monday, this coming Monday, people will be able to view vacant properties, and house moves where a sale has already been agreed but not yet completed can now go through. So it's a step in the direction of reopening the marketing in Wales, which I'm sure is very welcoming to a lot of people.
Can I just add in there, Dan? Government advice is, if possible, your initial viewing to be a virtual or pre-recorded video viewing, and actually it's a new feature just launched on Rightmove, where there's a button or a label that says online viewing. It's early days yet because we've only recently launched it, but essentially that means that the agent has taken some video content. So keep an eye out for those properties. As I say, not that many properties with them on at the moment, but keep an eye out, because that is a way, particularly in Wales, if the property is not vacant, then hopefully you'll be able to do an initial video viewing, or indeed if you're selling and your property hasn't got a pre-recorded video organised by the agent, have a chat with your agent, because with the restrictions on viewings and need to view safely, it's actually very time efficient and a good way to draw up a short list of ones to physically view if you can view a selection of recorded or live stream videos or 3D virtual tours.
Those are good points. Miles, we're getting quite a few questions from people, our audience, who are asking for clarification here, because they're saying that they've heard or read news elsewhere. You did talk a little bit about negative news in the media or elsewhere on the grapevine. But then on the other hand, you're talking about the data that you're talking about is showing increased demand, increased volumes of sales, higher prices achieved, fewer reductions, and those are actually signs of a market which is pretty buoyant. It's not negative news, at least. Let's put it that way. Why is that? Well, where does that? What is that gap?
I suppose the basic economics of supply and demand. I said earlier, there's 175,000 fewer properties on the market than there would normally have been in a traditional year, but demand's come back very strong, so they're looking at fewer properties. Luckily, there's fresh choice coming to market as well, and so a combination of several years of people postponing moves, but reigniting them coming into this year. We've not had the busy spring market, so if you like, the calendar's also been rewritten. Summer, even though I look outside and it's raining, summer is the new spring. So the spring market is now taking place. People can't go away. Plus, there's those people with changed circumstances or a desire to move home, having been very closely acquainted with their existing home and probably reappraised their housing needs and decided that it's the time to move. So a lot of the good conditions are still there that were there earlier. So that's the reason behind it. Obviously, some of this is pent up and will be a release. The big question is, what is the new normal level once that release of people's pent up demands has dissipated to a degree?
Yes, in fact, this is Andy is asking, but I think he's speaking for a lot of people, and it's a valid question. Could it be that this increase in activity that we're seeing right now, all of this pent up demand, is sort of a post-lockdown rush that will slow in a few months' time?
Obviously, hard to say, but activity levels on Rightmove, 30-40% above previous record levels prior to lockdown. So this really is unprecedented demand, and I think the unknown is how much of this demand is existing, but how much of it is extra demand because of people's changing needs and circumstances during lockdown. And that might be a layer of extra demand on top of traditional demand that was there as we went into lockdown as well. If there is a lot of extra demand, then that gives the market momentum and reason for it to continue. But obviously, it does depend on economic circumstances, mortgage rates, and employment, which I'm sure we've got a question later on as well.
Yeah, certainly. So this increase in activity and the increase in demand and everything, it's obviously not just going to keep on going up forever. And there are some concerns that could it be that this is a bubble that is about to pop? What
Yeah,
are your thoughts on that?
I've worked through lots of downturns, and they're,
You're not that
they're,
old, Miles.
they're different in terms of characteristics. This one quite different. Quite a few have had a price boom before a downturn, and that is really where the phrase bubble comes from. Prices are overinflated, and then they go pop like a bubble. But we went into this downturn, well, I say downturn at the moment. Activity is high and appears to be upwards price pressure, but we went into this with gentle house price inflation, 2-3% a year, and as I say, low mortgage rates. Mortgage rates are still low as well, and there's that demand there. So very much different to previous downturns, but obviously because this one's different and because there was a total pause of the market, very hard to compare it to anything before as well, because of its unique circumstances. So what we can say, and the facts that that we've analysed now, that everybody can see, is activity's there, demand's there, supply starting to come back, and prices are being underpinned by that activity.
Lots of mentions about the fact that some banks and building societies have cut down slightly on the amount that they are lending, and particularly their LTV value. How does that play into what's happening?
Yeah, this is something to really keep an eye on, because obviously first-time buyers, and we'll come on to them later, put down lower deposits. So important that the mortgage market remains fluid. Lenders obviously they have their own books to balance. I do think one of the issues, lenders, same as the rest of us, a lot of them are working from home, and their processing capability is compromised to a degree, and also there's a backlog to process that's built up sort of before and during and in the last few weeks as well. So surveyors have got to get out and survey properties and value them. So no lender, I think, is able to cope with vast amounts of mortgages at the moment. So this is certainly one to keep a close eye on, because the availability of mortgages with lower deposits of 10 or 15% is important to the market. And the first-time buyer sector does make up 30 to 40% of the market.
Yeah. Taking everything into consideration that we've spoken about so far, people want to get your opinion, your advice, starting off with people who are thinking of selling? Is now the right time to sell? Would you advise to bring the house to the market now or to wait?
I mean, if you look at that graph earlier, you would say that there's a good window to sell now. There's high demand. There's 175,000 fewer sellers to compete against when those buyers are looking. But I do think it's important not to overprice. The annual rate of house price inflation at the minute, just 2.9%. It is a price sensitive market still. And interestingly, just delving into some more of our statistics, only 15% of properties sell subject to contract in the first month, and a further 19% of new listings coming to market sell in the next 4 to 8 weeks. So around 2/3 of properties take longer than 8 weeks to sell subject to contract and find a buyer. So I think really important to take advantage of this momentum and price realistically, and try and be in that third that sell within 8 weeks. Or if you're not getting a lot of interest after a couple of weeks on the market, consider a price reduction, and it goes out again on Rightmove's mailing list. So a price reduction of 2% or more gets you back in the marketplace. So I think reacting quickly is my advice to sellers.
So if there's this wonderful opportunity for sellers to sell, then that immediately takes me to the next question for those who are buyers. Is it a good time for them to be buying then?
I think let's split buyers into two. There's obviously some that have actually bought a property already subject to contract, and there was speculation during lockdown, you know, should we renegotiate? Now it's easy to say with hindsight, but now that there's all this demand, perhaps the best time to renegotiate was during lockdown when the market was closed. Now that there's good demands and we're saying that prices haven't dropped on average, that opportunity has probably gone or less likely. In terms of general buying, as I said, we're not seeing rampant price increases. So this sort of gentle market where there's more properties coming to market, then particularly if you've got a pressing need to move or a desire to move, you've perhaps postponed that move already, then do you postpone again or get on with it? So I'd say have a good look round, which obviously a lot of people are doing. And if you see the right property and the right deal and can get a good fixed rate mortgage deal, then I would look at the longer term and say, I'm going to be in this house for a long time, so why not buy now? Obviously, if it's a short-term purchase, then there's less certainty for you buying in the short term, but most people have a longer term view and treat a property purchase as a home.
In fact, Lisa is asking a very interesting question. She says, I don't really understand what's happening right here and right now, and I don't think anyone does. I want to buy, and I want to be in my house for 10 years or more. How much should I let today's stats influence my decision if I'm thinking long term? I guess the
Well,
question is the fluctuations in price and in the market that we're seeing right now, how much impact do they have on the investment, on the house as an investment in
yeah,
5 to 10 years time?
yeah. Over the long term, property prices have increased. As I say, there wasn't an overinflated bubble as we went into lockdown. So if you're buying for the long term, then I think you'll enjoy the property over many years, and price is secondary, but history has shown that over the long term, prices do tend to increase. and can be a good hedge against general inflation as well. So longer term buyers, you've obviously got to find the right property, and if it makes your heart beat faster, then that's always a good sign.
Miles, we've come to 45 minutes of the session, but most everyone is still on and
Let's
they're still
crack on.
sending in questions. Are you okay with taking a few
Let's
more?
crack on.
Okay, fantastic. We really should talk a little bit about the rental market as well. Renters, there's a smaller portion of them online right now, but what has happened to the rental market and to rental prices?
Yeah, and there's renters online, and those looking to buy may well be looking to buy a buy-to-let as well.
Yes, there are some of those questions as well.
Yeah, so rents appear pretty stable. Obviously, there's been the ability to defer one's rent if one's in financial difficulty. So what we've seen is good rental demand and similar demand figures to what we've seen in sales as well. And obviously, rentals suits a very immediate housing need. So that's one of the reasons behind that boost in demand as well. So stability on the rental side too.
Speaking of rentals, then what advice would you give to landlords? Is it a good time to invest in buy-to-let or not?
It's interesting just looking at the search activity on Rightmove. Some of the greatest increase in inquiry levels in towns has been in some of the cheaper average asking price towns in the north. So I'm talking Rochdale and Bolton and Wigan. So one of the reasons behind that, we think, is perhaps in times of degrees of uncertainty, people are looking to invest in bricks and mortar, and buy-to-let landlords with those cheaper than average prices can probably get a good return in some of those towns that I've mentioned. So I do think the rental side will stay stable, particularly looking at that demand, and particularly if some mortgages are harder to get for first-time buyers, then that means that demand for rental will go up as well.
Has lockdown impacted what renters are looking for? I mean, buy-to-let investors might be interested in knowing if there's been a change in the types of properties they're looking for.
Yeah, and this applies to buyers and obviously applicable therefore to sellers, but also landlords. There's been an 84% increase in rental searches looking for gardens. So
84%.
84%.
Is
So
since when?
that's compared to pre-lockdown.
Oh,
So
wow.
what we've got is a situation where if a buy-to-let landlord is looking to invest further, perhaps look at somewhere that's got a garden, because you're going to have good demand from tenants. You've obviously got to keep an eye on not paying too much for the property, because that affects the amount of return you get in terms of rent, and obviously people will pay more for a property with a garden in rent, but you've got to do your sums, because there's no point buying a place with a couple of acres that's cost you a lot of money and hoping to get a good rental return on it. So, but at the margins, the demand is there for properties with gardens for rental people, because people like a bit of outside space, and have particularly realised that given the fact that they've been locked inside for a longer period of time.
I don't know if this is if this is an answerable question, because I'm sure it varies from case to case, but a lot of several buy-to-let investors asking, would you recommend holding on to my property and renting it out, or selling it if demand is high at the moment?
Well, it depends on your personal circumstances. Obviously, if you've owned it for some time, you might have capital gains tax issues, but certainly looking at that demand at the moment, it could be a good time to sell. But also, I think that we'll have good long-term rental demand too. So really the choice is yours depending on your personal circumstances.
Okay. A lot of questions as well of people asking if you think that there will be any changes to stamp duty as an incentive from the government to promote more transactions. Have you heard anything about that or any?
Obviously, stamp duty or other incentives or encouragement of lenders to lend at higher loan to values, so people with lower deposits can buy. These are all things that are available to the government, and they've done them before. So it's a case of watch this space. At the moment, with the market looking pretty buoyant, then there doesn't appear to be the need for them, but they are things that no doubt the government might well be considering, because obviously home moving is part of the economic recovery. This government has so far supported employers very well and employees very well, pumped a lot of money into supporting the economy, so that's an indication that they may well continue to do so.
Many of our lovely listeners are asking me to ask you to have a look in your crystal ball and say where you think prices will be at in the next 12 to 18 months.
Well, we were particularly pleased to be able to report the facts of the last month rather than speculate, because, as I say, there was some speculation that we'd see a short-term dip in prices. Obviously, we're still in the short term, but all the statistics look good so far. Obviously, predictions fraught with difficulty, depends on all sorts of circumstances over the next 12 or 18 months. Plus, obviously, we've got Brexit thrown into the mix as well. The speculation about and reality of greater unemployment. How many of those will be potential home buyers remains to be seen. But I think the long-term demand for housing that we've seen come back quickly gives one hope for the future. But no doubt we are going to be going through some more challenging times over the next few months. So my broad forecast would be about level pegging with where we are now. But I think it's an important point, Dan, is that that's an average. There are going to be variations depending on geography, local employment, local supply and demand of property issues, but also what does your property offer? Now, obviously, during lockdown, we've talked about people looking for gardens more, but if you've got home working space, that's going to be a new hot button for buyers. So if your property's got a nice home working space and somebody is working from home more, as I think a lot of us are going to be doing long term, then I think that's going to be sought after. Rural settings, the biggest increase in inquiries that we've seen on Rightmove compared to 12 months ago is actually Hereford, 77% more inquiries than a year ago.
Oh, wow.
It's rural, it's historic, it's not a big city, but it's got amenities, and maybe Hereford is the new role model for what people are looking for. But as well as that, more demand for coastal locations, waterside locations. I was chatting to a Scottish agent today, even though they're still not open for business, inundated with inquiries in the last few weeks for a rundown property by a lock. It was on the market before lockdown. He had no inquiries. So lots of changes in people's habits, but importantly, good internet access as well. So outside space, local parks, local walks, home working space, all now higher up people's wish lists, and that will have an effect on values. Less high up people's wish lists, transport links, because that daily commute is not going to be a fact of life for as many people.
There's a question which might be one of our last ones, and I think that you generally have answered it, at least indirectly, but it is one of the most popular questions, and they're still coming in, and that is for buyers in the scenario in which they made an offer on a property before lockdown. That offer was accepted. They haven't exchanged yet, obviously, so they're asking if it might be a good idea to revisit that offer and come in with a lower one. What have you got to say to that?
Well, I'll again repeat the facts and statistics. I'm afraid sort of don't give you a great negotiating hand, because the statistics are showing high demand and prices stable or slight upwards pressure. But having said that, there's different local market conditions, but also it does depend upon your circumstances as a buyer. They may have changed, so maybe you can afford less, and it depends on the circumstances of the seller, whether they can afford to drop or not. But I did say a few minutes ago that possibly, with hindsight, the best time to negotiate a lower price was during lockdown, when there were no statistics and there was negative speculation. Now that we've got some statistics, it does seem to be weakening the negotiating hand of buyers and strengthening that of sellers to a degree.
Okay, well, we are coming now to the end of this session. Actually, we've already stayed for almost another extra 15 minutes. That's just because the demand was there for more time here. I'm going to try and summarize some of the key points that we talked about. And Miles, correct me if at any point I'm wrong or if you want to add something. So a lot of the questions that came in were about prices and whether they have fallen since lockdown. The short answer, especially to those people who weren't here in the beginning, they haven't. Prices are still holding up so far. What we are seeing is actually an increased activity as a result of this pent-up demand, which has been building up for quite some time, even before lockdown, and then increased by lockdown. And this increase in demand has actually pushed prices upward by 1.9% compared to before lockdown. Is that right?
That's the price of new properties coming to market, 1.9% higher than before lockdown.
Okay. The next question then is, how long will this increase in activity last for? It's still too early to know, but you know, it will depend very heavily on certain factors such as employment rates and mortgage availability. So hopefully in coming months this will become even clearer. But looking at the bigger picture of what was happening before lockdown and what we have seen since, because demand is high and supply proportionately is low at the moment, we can only go by these factors, and so the outlook for pricing seems relatively stable at the moment. This is probably good news for many people. Maybe not so much for first-time buyers who are hoping to see a slight dip in prices and in the hopes that they'd get a bargain to get onto the property ladder. But as Miles pointed out, if you are thinking of home as a long-term investment, then the marginal variation in pricing that we see today may not matter as much when you're looking at a bigger picture or a timescale of 5 to 10 years. Do you agree with that, Miles? Do you have anything to add?
No, that's a good summary, and it appears to be all sectors of the market that are having good demand. And actually, I got an email through from Savills today, who specialize in the upper end, and they say that their number of offers 35% higher than the 10-week average before lockdown. So all sectors of the market seem to be buoyant at the moment.
Okay, well, Miles, all that's left now is to, first of all, thank you for your time and for being here with us and taking all of these questions. You did answer them very well. And to our lovely, lovely audience out there, thank you for joining us. Thank you for participating, for answering the polls and answering all the questions. Asking all the questions that Miles then answered. We will be sending an email out to you with a recording of this in case you missed any of it. Do check out our website on Rightmove. We have a whole section on advice and updates on what's happening in the property market. We have a monthly house pricing index to keep you abreast of what is happening to prices. Stay in touch with your local estate agents, as they will be able to give you some good advice on not what's happening only in the country as a whole, but specifically in your street, your postcode. So thank you once again for joining us. Miles, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your days and the weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.